Shaktidhara Sudhamna Anyamscha Hastacharana Sravanatvagadin Pranan Namo Bhagavate Purushaya Dubhyam. We are beginning our retreats on this subject. As you know, the subject is the spiritual transformation, spiritual journey, a Bhagavatam story of spiritual transformation. So, at the very outset, I shall give an idea of this text that we are going to discuss today. Srimad Bhagavata is the most important devotional classic in Hindu Vedantic tradition. The most extensive, the most spiritual, and most philosophical. Altogether, 18,000 verses, very complicated language. It is one of the most obtuse Sanskrit texts. Much more complex than Bhagavad Gita, and in fact much more philosophical. Divided into 12 divisions, altogether around 335 chapters. This is a very interesting book. Now, you can never talk about devotion or spiritual life in Vedantic tradition without referring to this book. Now, there is something very interesting about the man who wrote this book. And his life itself is an example of this spiritual transformation. You know, he was at that time the most accomplished Sanskrit Pandit, author, philosopher, and the most renowned sage of his times. And you know, the entire Vedic literature was edited and classified and organized by him, Vasa. And Mahabharata, of which Bhagavad Gita is a small fragment, is his most extensive work, more than 100,000 verses, almost 18,000 characters, about 1020 dialogues, philosophical dialogues. In his larger version, it is about 120,000. In his standard version that you get, his standardized version is more than 100,000 verses. And this Bhagavad Gita, which is perhaps the most well-known of Hindu Vedantic text, is a small fragment of this book. It was written by him. And innumerable other books of ways of life, Hindu Vyasa Smriti, and so on, Brahma Sutras, everything. Now, the most important thing about him was, he was a very depressed person at one point of time. After writing all this, he felt there was something wanting in his life, something incomplete, a nagging pain in his heart. So one day he was sitting in the evening, after evening ablutions, he was sitting on the banks of river Saraswati, which has actually disappeared maybe a few thousand years ago due to some cataclysmic earthquake, something, that river completely disappeared. So he was at that time sitting on the banks of the river. And then another sage happened to come to that place and meet him, even Narada. So Narada asked him, "What's the matter with you?" In fact, his own disciples were great scholars and saints. Shuka, the teacher of Bhagavata Purana, he is one of his disciples. And if you look at the Puranic literature, you don't find anyone who was not somehow linked to his spiritual lineage. But he was very, very unhappy. So you can find this happening in our own life. You may be a billionaire, the most successful man in business, But at night when you return to your own home, in your own private room, you are not able to have peaceful sleep for 6 hours, 7 hours a day. You have to take pills, you have to take medicines. So people sometimes feel, even after achieving so much of success, you find that there is something wanting, something missing, something incomplete, which you don't know what it is, but then you feel that emptiness within. So Narada asked him, what's the matter? So he said, this is my condition. I'm unhappy, though my own disciples are much more happy, but I'm unhappy. So then Narada asked him, so what did you do? What did you write latest? What was the latest work? He said, Mahabharata. Now in Mahabharata, the topic of discussion is Dharma. Now this Dharma ideal that you find in Mahabharata is not the Dharma of Buddhism. It is Dharma, just a code of conduct, rules and regulations, like a constitution. That's the real meaning of Dharma in Mahabharata. Dharyade Dharma iti. The meaning is something that supports what? Artha and Kama. I mean, enjoyments and the tools for those enjoyments. You want to be happy, so you need money. Money is a tool, it's a means for happiness. And money gives you happiness in normal human life. So, Dharma, as explained in the Mahabharata, is not the supreme spiritual ideal that you find in the Buddhism, where Dharma is the supreme ideal, So, and that Dharma is neutral. So if you look at Mahabharata, those who are familiar, you find there are many villains and there are many heroes. There are many wonderful characters. There are wonderful female characters. There are wonderful male characters. They're very great people. And there are villains also. Duryodhana is the arch villain. And he had his own justification for doing the wrong thing and not for doing the right thing. And there are also great sages and saints and philosophers like Bhishma, Drona, Vidura and others. So in Mahabharata there is a problem. Everyone has his own justification for doing what he is doing. So that's some of a constitution. Each country has its own constitution, do's and don'ts. So Narada told him, that is okay, but that's not enough. Did you write about something that will throw light into the dark corners of the human mind? That's a literal translation of the Sanskrit verse. Did you write anything that helps a human being in his spiritual journey? Narada asked him. So Vyasa said, no, I don't feel. I wrote about Dharma. I wrote about the Dharma or rules and regulations for the kings, for householders, for philosophers, for common people. But I did not write about anything that gives spiritual fulfillment to anyone. Then Narada told, you write about that. If you write it, if you write such a book, then your unhappiness will disappear. You become happy. And Vyasa wrote this book, 18,000 verses. He begins at the very beginning in a very philosophical tone. He begins. And finally, when he reached the end, towards the end of the 12th division, that is Dvadasha Skandha, of the text, the 12th section of the text, Satyam Param Dhimahi, I meditate upon the supreme truth, his depression vanished without taking any medicine. He took a medicine. The medicine was not for his body, for his mind. He could establish a spiritual connection with some higher ideal. He wrote about something that will help an ordinary human being in his spiritual journey. And when he did that, his own unhappiness disappeared. So that is the mystery of this well-known book. The most well-known book, well-known text in devotional tradition. So the story that I have selected for discussion this time is from the first division, Prathama Skandha, the first section. So the story is something like this. There was a great king in ancient times, and he was a great emperor, a philosopher, a highly accomplished person who was living a very, very ethical, moral life. But one day he happened to commit one serious crime, a sinful deed. It was one day, he was walking in the forest, and he became very hungry and thirsty. In those days, kings used to spend months and weeks and months in forests. The hunting was the common sport of the ancient times. And so one day, when he was tired and exhausted, he entered a hermitage. And in that hermitage, an old saint was meditating. So he entered the hermitage. He found that the sage was not aware of his presence. He was hungry and thirsty. He wanted drinking water. He couldn't get anything. The sage did not get up and greet him because he was deeply immersed in meditation. Then the king got angry. Normally he won't do that. He was an ideal king, but he made a mistake when you become hungry and thirsty. So he said, you are not honoring me. I am the king of this place, and you are an old man sitting in meditation. So when he became very angry, he looked around. He came out of the hermitage, looked around, and he took a dead snake that was lying about in the hermitage grounds. He lifted it with his bow and put it in the neck of the sage, dead snake, and he went away. And then what happened? After some time, the sage opened his eyes and he found a stinking smell, and then realized. By the time his own disciples came, they found that Guru was being insulted, a dead snake lying on his neck. So one of his disciples, put a curse on him that, whoever has done such a terrible thing, he will die on the seventh day from now, and will be bitten by a snake, and he will be killed by a snake bite. And this is the curse. Now the surprising thing is, some of the people reported this incident to the king. The king did not get angry. He did not become, he was a big king, he could be punished, but he didn't do that. Instead, he said, well, I did something wrong, and I deserve this punishment. That's the beginning of the story. Now here the point is, a powerful emperor or king who would have punished this old man and his disciple for putting a curse on him. Instead of doing that, he said, I did something wrong, and this is the punishment for me. And so I need to be punished. Now remember, there is a very touching spiritual transformation. A king becomes a sage and saint, a philosopher. This is a story. So I shall read some of these well-known verses, and that will make it more authentic looking. Just a story from Puranas will be like a myth. So I try to read out the text. So the text I am reading, if you happen to read later on, if you read, we can read the 19th chapter of the first division, Prathama Skandha, first Skandha of 19th chapter. So in this verse, the king is telling, Dhruvam tato me krutadeva helanad Duratyam vyasanam na adidirgha tadastu me kamam tu aghanishkrudaya me yadhana kuryam punareva madhva. What he says is, I did something horrible, and therefore, because I did such a terrible thing, I am not going to live long. There's an old belief that if you do something really wonderful, your longevity will be increased. And if you do something terrible, it will be decreased. Actually, our destiny and our life is made up of these building blocks. And what are the building blocks? Our own actions. So you can find when we do good things, when we speak good things, when we think noble thoughts, and when we wish well for others, what happens is it actually creates certain samskaras and vrittis, tendencies, impressions in our mental system. And it comes from our actions. So our destiny is the totality, the sum total of our actions. Because actions also influence emotions and feelings, tendencies, impressions. And emotions and feelings also influence actions. So we can never do a noble deed without spiritually getting refined. It's a very important thing. We know a lot about how mind influences actions, but actions also directly influence our mind. Anyone who goes on doing good things cannot help being a civilized, refined, a spiritually inclined person. Because actions produce two types of result, the tangible and the intangible. When the immediate result of the action is gone, there is another result that remains intact, and that is in the form of a tendency. That is the direct product of this action. So this king realized that he did such a terrible thing, putting a dead snake on the neck of a great saint who has done him no harm, was sitting in his own hermitage silently meditating and teaching scriptures, doing good things for others. And he, the king, who was supposed to protect those people, he had insulted him. So the point is, because he was a noble person, he could throw the flashlight into his own heart, in his own mind. So he realized that he did something wrong. And that's what helps him to undergo this spiritual transformation. Those who make a mistake but never realize that they made a mistake, and so they become proud of that mistake, they have no scope for any kind of reformation. So here he says, Duratyam vyasanam nadidirghat tadastu me kamam tu aganishkrudaya me. Then he's praying, well, I have done something wrong, but my children, my royal family, they should not be affected, they should be spared of this fate. And he, with a prayer, he realizes, well, I did something terribly wrong, and therefore I need this punishment, but this punishment should not extend beyond me. And then, of course, he says, Addeva Rajyam Belamurdha Kosham Prakopita Brahmakulanalo me Dahatu Abhadrasya Punarnam May Abhut Papiyasi Dhir Dvija Deva Gopyaka. What he says is, when I did something terribly wrong, it is certainly going to affect me, but let this not affect my children, my grandchildren. So it's something very interesting about this is, one may ask this question, it is an ordinary thing, why should you worry so much? In fact, anyone who does any kind of spiritual practice, it could be meditation, it could be reading scriptures, or maybe karma yoga, or maybe any noble, unselfish act. Remember, not necessarily praying to a God. That's a very important thing. One can pray to God all his life and remains a very wicked person. And one need not go to any temple or a church and still be a very noble person. That possibility is there very often. So here the whole point is the essence of spirituality. That's what Parikshit is telling us. The essence of spirituality is our own spiritual transformation and not a slavish clinging to some transcendental being. That is important, that's very helpful. Prayer, meditation, all these are very, very helpful. Churches, temples, every place, everything is wonderful. But only to the extent that it helps us in our own spiritual life, in our own spiritual transformation. Otherwise, there is a, in fact, Parikshit is going to, in the discussion, the idea comes, I should be able to see God beyond the walls of the temple. The highest devotee is one who experiences the presence of God everywhere, every minute. That comes later in this dialogue. So what this king did was, he gave up, he renounced his kingdom, he renounced his comforts, his palace, and all the glory that goes along with being a king or emperor. And he decides to go to the banks of river Ganga. And he sits there. And he says, Adeva, today itself I am going to do that. This today, just now, I am going to give up my kingdom, my comforts, everything. And I am beginning a new spiritual journey. So you can remember 7 into 24 hours. That's the lifespan he has got. According to the curse, he was supposed to die on the 7th day from that very moment. He has only 7 days to live. So if anyone gets the report that he has only 7 days to live, it may be a disaster for him, big shock. But in this man's case, it became a great opportunity. And here remember how this king, he transforms a tragedy into a great spiritual opportunity. This is an important principle you can find in the lives of all great spiritual personalities, mystics and saints and sages. Every misfortune is taken to be an obstacle course to strengthen their own devotion, their own spiritual life. So there is a well-known verse. It's not from Bhagavata Purana, but from another devotional book, where God is talking to a devotee. A mother, it's not mentioned in Mahabharata, but frequently scholars put in the mouth of Kundi, the great feminine character in Mahabharata. The verse is this: Yasya anugraham ichchami tasya vittam harameham bandhavaisya viyogena bhrisham bhavati dukkhita tena dukkhena samtapto idimam na parityaji tam prasadam karishyami yadevairabi sudurlavam. It's a Sanskrit verse, but you won't miss anything, I shall explain this. What it means is, for a devotee of God, every difficult situation, every obstacle, every problem is a blessing from God. Because that problem helps him to work hard to solve the problem, and as part of that effort to solve the problem, the devotee prays to God more sincerely. That indirectly helps him to grow in spiritual life. So this is an important thing. Now what happens is, the literal translation is, if the statement as if it's coming from God, I shall steal the wealth of those for whom wealth is an obstruction or obstacle in his life. I shall turn him into a pauper. And with harame means I shall steal, take away. That's the meanings. Well, today I was reading in the meditation spiritual life, I was reading from the life of St. Augustine, St. Francis, and there are innumerable other saints in Indian history. So we can imagine, suppose St. Augustine had a wonderful life, he would not have undergone a transformation. If St. Francis had continued to be a soldier, a bohemian, St. Augustine had remained a bohemian, you won't have confessions or city of God, and you won't have the city of San Francisco named after St. Francis, the Franciscan order, which is a great monastic tradition in Catholic Church. So you can imagine, behind every great historical episode, events in the history of spirituality, there was somebody who happened to have a problem, and as part of solving the problem, he became a saint, maybe a philosopher sometimes. So you can imagine Tolstoy would not have written The War and Peace, a great a novel that can all be called a philosophical classic, without that wife who was not a very pleasant person, or when Socrates, for that matter. Even Socrates had a wonderful, household life. You would never have become such a great saint. It doesn't mean that you need a problem to become great, not at all. Shankaracharya became a saint and philosopher when he was only 6-year-old. So what it means is, for a spiritual person, even a so-called problem becomes an opportunity. That's why he says, today itself I am going to give up everything. And then what happens is, this king eventually goes to the banks of river Ganga. And there he finds a number of sages have already assembled. After hearing about this news, the king was cursed, he did something terrible, putting a dead snake on the neck of a sage, and instead of getting angry and punishing the hermit, he put it on himself. Well, I did something wrong, so this is an opportunity for me to start a new life, a new spiritual life, new chapter in my spiritual life. Frequently this is called a kind of awakening, opening the eyes. So in many of our classical Vedantic works, it is said, we are all asleep, physically not asleep, but spiritually asleep. Anadi maya supto yadha jiva prabuddhide ajam anidram asopam advedam vidyate tatha. You find a well-known book in Mandukya. It means we are in a deep slumber, a deep spiritual slumber. And then what happens is, and once we get a shock and we are forced to open our eyes. Now there is no way, and if we don't allow ourselves to undergo this spiritual transformation, the other alternative frequently is insanity or alcoholism, drug addiction. This is an important point. So nobody needs to consider a problem as a problem if we can look at it from a very positive angle. So if we don't allow ourselves to learn a lesson and let ourselves undergo this transformation, what happens is we go deeper and deeper. So there is a well-known verse, Prakshalanam, see, there's prakshalanam hi papak pangasya asparsanam varam. This meaning, suppose you're walking on a road and there is a pile of dirt and filth. Two persons are walking. One man says, well, I would rather walk over the dirt and filth and wash my feet later. The other person says, no, I shall rather take a detour, avoid touching that. Durat asparsanam varam. Prakshalanat ki pangasya durat asparsanam varam. It's an ancient Sanskrit verse. What it means is, it's far better to take a detour and avoid touching the dirt and filth than thinking, well, I shall walk over it and wash my feet later. So like that, it's always easier for us to be able to avoid a problem and then take refuge in spirituality as a solution to this problem. Anyway, what happened was, this king, I shall put in the story quickly, and before that, just to finish one important topic in the morning session, then we can Q&A. What happened was, this king finally reached the river Ganga. And there he found many sages. One of them was Shuka, the greatest philosopher, saint of those times. And he asked question, he put a question to the saint, what should a dying man do? This question. What should you, suppose you have got 7 days, how should you spend the rest of your lifetime? And in answer to this, in the next chapter, the great philosopher saint answers, well, you can do one thing. You can practice karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, whatever means any kind of spiritual discipline you can practice. And then you should be able to realize the supreme spiritual goal of your life. So, Ante Narayana Smriti, what it means is, one should be able to leave this world with a smile on our lips. Because we should not feel we are carrying a huge burden with us. And the sage continues in his answer, he says, you know, when the last minute comes in our life, we will have only one baggage to carry home after this life. That is your own good actions and bad actions. The essence of whatever you have done. Remember, this story can be properly understood only if you accept the doctrine of reincarnation, rebirth, and the doctrine of karma. Without keeping these two doctrines in mind, we won't be able to fully appreciate this story. So you can keep that in mind, the reincarnation and the doctrine of karma. These are two important principles which are accepted here. And then as an answer to this question, what should a dying man do in his life? 18,000 verses are written by Shuka as an answer to this. That's the greatness of the book. If those of you who are Western literary tradition, I can only think of one example, that is from Russian literature. You know, there's a book called The Idiot, Dostoevsky's Idiot. In Dostoevsky's Idiot, there's a character, Prince Minskin. He's a very wonderful man. So Dostoevsky wrote this idiot to portray a character who looked as much like a Christ as possible, with total failure, because the man comes from a lunatic asylum and returns to lunatic asylum. So what it means is, you cannot get an ideal, a successful, complete man without some inner balancing system. That's the view of, if you're interested, you can read Dr. Rowan Williams, the Archbishop of Canterbury, wrote a well-known critical book on Dostoevsky. That's a different story. But I'll come to this story because very, very, very insightful. So the point is, the story goes like this. It's actually taken from Dostoevsky. So Bhagavatam to Dostoevsky is long distance. But you have to keep in mind to keep it contemporary. It's very interesting. And you find how great minds can connect with great ideas in a surprisingly identical manner. So in this idiot, a convict is about to be executed. He is at the back of the line. So he's moving forward. The firing squad is ready, and then he remembers, I have just about a few minutes to leave. How do I spend my time? Parikshit had 7 days, this convict just a few minutes. So he says, first I shall, in my mind, I shall ask for forgiveness for whatever wrong I have done. And then I shall wish good for everyone. He's a convict actually. Man, not necessarily a good, wonderful person. But he feels the need to carry with him a good baggage when he leaves this life, And the Russian Orthodox Church is the background, the cultural background against which this book is written by Dostoevsky. So this man, he wants to empty his undesirable things, baggage leave behind, and go to a higher life. So he thinks, well, I shall first pray for everyone. Maybe a few years ago, I threw a stone at a dog when I was a little boy. I'm very sorry I did that. All those thoughts flashed through his mind. Now, what does Parikshit do? Parikshit's question is, in that question, Parikshit is asking the question, and just I shall read out that well-known Parikshit's Ata prichami samsiddhim yoginam paramam gurum purusha seha yat karyam mriyamanasya sarvata. The Parikshit's question is, he's asking this question to Shuka, the great saint. I'm going to put a question to you. Ata prichami samsiddhim guru yoginam paramam gurum purusasya mriyamanasya yat karyam. It means a person who is about to die, what is his duty? What should he do? Now remember, this question is as relevant for a youth of 20 years, healthy, strong, who may have maybe 80 more years to live, as much as for a 100-year-old man. With just a time is just a matter of degrees, not of kind. So that's a deep philosophy of this episode. So he's asking this question, what should a human being focus on doing? Because every human being is being stirred upon by death. I should tell you something interesting. Very often, people say we should concentrate on the positive. We should always, everything is wonderful. Why should we worry about death and sickness? It is almost like saying we should always be eating chocolates and candies. So why should we drink water? It is as stupid as that. As we evolve further from impulse to intelligence and wisdom, we learn to look at life as a whole in its complete whole. Life has a meaning that goes beyond today and the present. So that's the answer. So Parikshit is asking this question on behalf of the entire humanity. How should we live our life? And eventually, how should we look upon our own trials and challenges and tribulations that we have to encounter in our life? So I shall come back to this subject again. Sarvagataha sarvada eva sarve veda yadha murtis trivi pradishte nehathava mutrana kaschanartha rite paranugraham atmashilam. So the author is here, Shuka himself. Shuka is the teacher. He is narrating the whole incident. On the banks of river Ganga, all the great philosophers and saints and sages have assembled. It's the ancient tradition in India, ancient India. These great saints and sages and mystics used to wander from place to place. Sometimes they will meet common people in the streets. Sometimes they go to kings in their courts and discuss philosophy. Sometimes they live as guests in the homes of people. So it's a common practice in those days. You can imagine Swami Vivekananda in the 19th century, from 1886 to 1893, he traveled as a wanderer in India. So you can find many similar stories in the medieval Europe when these Franciscan Dominican orders. Friars used to move from place to place talking to people. So this verse is just a reference to these wandering monks in ancient times who used to go from place to place to discuss philosophy. The point is, think beyond the present and beyond the today to make the present more livable, to look upon life as a whole as a complete journey in pursuit of higher life. So in that context, suddenly came the Shuka. In the 25th chapter, Tatragamat Bhagavan Vyasaputro Dritchaya Gam Atamano Anapekshaka Alakshalingo Nijalabatushtu Vidas Strip Balai Rabadhuda Veshaka. It's a very interesting. Those who have read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, you get this picture here. When this king, after renouncing all his kingdom, his comforts, his palace, everything, when he reached the banks of river Ganga, he found that many sages have assembled there. Among them, after some time, another saint came. His name is Shuka. And there is a picture drawn of that great sage. He was Alakshalingo. He had no external symbols. And he was Avadhuta, means just a wandering friar. And he looked like Avadhuta. Sometimes those great saints and sages look like mad people, sometimes like somebody insane, totally unconventional, not in a pompous, not in a formal setting, but just an ordinary human being. They wander from place to place. You cannot get an idea of the greatness when you look at them. In the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, you find, if you read the Gospel, suddenly some strange persons appear in the Dakshineshwar. They have not taken bath for a long time. They are not very clean physically. There is nothing that is symbolic of their real greatness. But Sri Ramakrishna said, this man is a great Avadhuta, a great Paramahamsa. So Shuka belongs to that category. In the Gospel, there is an interesting scene. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting in the Dakshineshwar. So suddenly an old man, he apparently looked very, very unconventional, very with strange clothes, outlandish manners. But there was a brilliant sign of wisdom on his face, because those who are focused on some higher ideal, the way they look will be different, So in this case, Sri Ramakrishna told his nephew Hriday, you go after him, And the Hriday tried to chase him, go after him. And he looked back and said, he wanted just one advice. When you see no distinction between the pure water of Ganga and the water in the ditch water, then only you have reached the highest. Means when you are able to see the same divine spark in everything and everywhere. So that kind of the inner experience of the spiritual unity and oneness of everything in this world, that is the highest mystical spiritual experience. With this advice, that saint vanished. So you can find in ancient times the same thing. A philosopher, a saint, is not a philosopher apparently, not a professor of philosophy, but rather somebody who had identified himself with the supreme spiritual ideals. Every minute is experiencing, is celebrating the spiritual unity and oneness of existence. Such a man came, and he was Vyasaputra. He was the son of the author of this book. His own son was a far greater saint than the father himself. And when he reached, Parikshit put this question. Of course, there is an interesting question. People like you come only to bless others, and now I have come here, and Parikshit explained his situation. Then he put this question. I'm asking this question to you. What is the question? Purusasyeha yat karyam mriyamanasya sarvadha. What should a dying man do? And then yes sodavyam atho japyam yat kartavyam drviprabho smartavyam bhajaniyam va bruhi yadduva viparyam. The question is asked in the context of Hinduism or Vedanta. What should one listen to, and how should one pray, do japa? How should one practice karma yoga? And how should we remember great things? What should we remember? And also what one should not do. So two questions are asked. A simple question: suppose a person, and anyone for the matter, gets information that he has a serious illness, and how should we prepare for his next life? Remember, there is no break between one life and another life. Life is taken a continuous journey without a break. It is a succession of one after another, continuous flow. That's the only context in which we will understand this spiritual philosophy. So that should be kept in mind. Any tradition that doesn't accept or take for granted these twin doctrines of the doctrine of reincarnation and the doctrine of karma will not be able to understand the true significance of this. When you understand this, there is no break in life. And death is only a semicolon, maybe a comma, not even a semicolon. Certainly never a full stop. So in modern times, I believe, of course, this is not preaching of a theological doctrine. So I think most of the problems we are facing because we think life is just one chance. So if something happens at the end of everything, that is absolutely wrong from a Vedantic perspective. I don't want to go into details of how the doctrine of reincarnation was rejected in the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, how Constantine the emperor superimposed, forced this rejection of the doctrine of reincarnation on the Catholics. I don't go into those details. Pre-Constantine times, Christianity completely accepted doctrine of reincarnation and doctrine of karma. It's a different subject which I don't want to open up. If you are interested, we can discuss. But the point is this: life is a complete whole. When you think of life as a complete whole, a continuous flow, without a break, there is absolutely no scope, no need for any kind of worry and anxiety. There is no such thing as degradation or going to hell or being damned or being condemned. Nothing of the kind. That's a very, very important point to remember. Every person can improve and go to a higher state, if not in this life, in next life. And every opportunity to do something good is an opportunity to build up a new and better life, if not in this life, maybe after death. So that's an important point. So why should this king ask this question? How should we do things? Yet kartavyam, what is his duty? So as I mentioned earlier, our actions constitute the building blocks of our destiny. That's a very important point. A brick, just as a brick becomes part of the building, if you take it out, it goes away. Building is nothing but the totality of these bricks and concrete and mortar and many other things put together. Like that, our actions, which again influence our feelings, emotions, thoughts, all these constitute the building blocks. So what we do, it kartavyam, and how we practice spiritual disciplines. Japa means spiritual disciplines. And what we should listen to. That's also very important. Because what we listen to also influences our mind. It's very important. Because we cannot listen to anything without that influencing indirectly or directly our mind and thoughts and feelings, and eventually our actions and our destiny. All these constitute different materials that together constitute the building. So everything is a building block. And again, the king doesn't stop there. He has bruhi yadva viparyam, and what we should not do. And incidentally, Shuka begins his reply, his response, by explaining what we should not do. And then he says what we should do. It's a very, very ancient text, but very modern, we can imagine. How our actions constitute our emotions and feelings, and how eventually they all constitute our destiny, and how we should look upon life as a continuous flow. So all these ideas are included in this discussion. We can have interaction for half an hour. You are most welcome. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah, thank you.
Fascinating text and a great opportunity for learning.
Yeah.
I want to ask about something you said earlier about the merit of obstacles as an opportunity to develop and continue in some positive ways on a journey. At the moment of encountering an obstacle, we don't necessarily immediately perceive it that way because of the shock of the new information.
Yeah.
But then, with the passage of time, we sometimes come to see that if we hadn't had the opportunity to deal with that obstacle, then we wouldn't have gotten to the next phase. The question I have has to do with the consequences of that for what's become a bit of a science of conflict resolution and negotiation in all sorts of things, both commercial and personal and social. And when we are trying to do advanced conflict resolution or negotiation, in all those contexts, we always encourage ourselves and others to look at overcoming obstacles together, as opposed to you're the obstacle, because it's often seen that other people are the obstacle. So my question has to do with the consequences of both, positive and negative, of either approaching obstacles individually or approaching them collectively so that obstacles can be overcome together.
Yeah. There are certain obstacles in our life which can be encountered only as individuals. And there are certain obstacles that they can affect an entire community or nation, which needs a different kind of response. Even for nations, you find some of the nations achieved great success, disproportionate degree of success and accomplishment. They did that only, they had to encounter some very serious challenges and persecutions, and as a part of the encounter, the attempt to face and successfully overcome these difficulties and persecutions, they achieve greatness in science, in technology, even in terms of civilizational, cultural values. Just as individuals, for example. Suppose we get a medical report that if we don't do exercise, we will have some serious health problems, and so a patient begins to practice exercise every day. That can eventually be an important factor. He may be able to avoid many other health problems which otherwise would have to encounter. So you find without some kind of challenges and obstacles, a country or nation or an individual cannot prosper. It's a fact that you find in empirical life. But in spiritual life, it works in a slightly different manner. Because we sometimes are forced to bring out our own inner resources as a necessary tool to face the problem we are encountering. It's actually the solution to the problems we already have, but we are not aware of that. So sometimes when we face a problem or encounter a challenge, one may start meditation, spiritual disciplines, and that opens up an entirely a new source of strength and self-confidence at the individual level. So nations also prospered and became great, accomplished great things because they had to face a lot of difficulties and challenges. Otherwise it would be impossible. There are huge nation states in the world, some were dormant because they didn't have to face very many problems. But small little nations and communities faced difficult situations, accomplished greatness in many areas. So it's an individual, community level, national level. At the individual level, it's much more important because we do have a lot of inner potential that we are not aware of, that we don't take seriously, we don't even remember. So when we face a problem, suddenly we are forced to turn into ourselves, into our own inner resources. And then we realize, well, that the potential, the ability to solve the problem is already there within us and it comes out. So without a difficulty, a challenge, a problem, this could not be possible. That's right. I don't know if I have answered the question or, yeah. Yeah, please continue.
Well, yes, you did. I mean, I was thinking you were going to say something like goodwill towards others.
Oh, yeah,
It's a good
yeah,
idea.
no,
Helps to create a
that's right.
tableau upon which
Yeah,
conflict
yeah.
resolution happens. But your answer was better because you both took it to the micro level of what an individual needs to do, regardless of the situation, and also very expansively what nations and societies need to do also. So your answer was wonderful.
Well, I can even give an example. For like a country like Japan, I don't consider a nation or a people as ideal or most exalted as a role model. What I mean to say, a small country with hardly any resources, you see, but because of the unity and homogeneity and hard work and discipline, this cult of perfectionism which became a religion for them. In spite of many of the problems, and not going to Second World War, what they did, that's a different story. But the ability to pull together, to bring together their resources and work for the progress, technology, science, economy, and so on. It's a good example of how a nation state, every week they have an earthquake or a tsunami. So nothing shocks them. Immediately within a week, everything is over. If something like that happens in many other countries, there will be disasters. So you can imagine. So it's something like a physiotherapist or a naturopathy person, he's any health problem, immediately he takes some little herb, sometimes he doesn't go to Kaiser. Like that. But then what you said also is true. When we do something good for others, when we think something good for others, that also will have a cooling, a healing effect on our own mind. That's a very important thing. Actually, it is a very healthy spiritual practice to wish well for everyone, to pray for everyone. If we cannot do, but at least we can think of good things for others, for everyone. That has got it has a dramatic effect on our own mind. Oh, thank you for the question. Yeah.
Thank you, Swami. It's just beautiful what you said this morning. I thought of a couple of parallels of this wonderful statement of Aeschylus. Through suffering, we come to knowledge.
Yeah.
And then also I was thinking of some of the great characters in the Bible. Almost all of them were flawed and had tremendous difficulties to work out of. I thought of Moses, who killed somebody. He became one of the greatest mystics in the world. And then David killed somebody, and look what he did. He wrote the Psalms and was one of the greatest teachers we have.
True.
And then, of course, we all know the story of Saul, who was breathing out threatening and slaughter and killed probably innumerable Christians, and then was on the road to Damascus, as we know, and experienced this blinding spiritual light. And he was blinded. And he said, Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? just, somewhat like this king that
Yeah.
you're talking about. And I was just thinking of all these great figures we have in the Western tradition too.
Yeah, there are many examples. Yeah, the biblical literature. Yeah,
all
of course.
through the Bible,
Yeah,
almost everywhere.
yeah,
But
yeah,
anyway, thank
yeah,
you so much.
yeah. Bible, every character has a message behind him.
Yes.
For the humanity and for spiritual seekers. Yeah, okay.
A beautiful example of Parikshit Maharaj's story to exemplify what we should do in this life as a building block for the continuous journey of the soul.
Yeah.
They say the action always creates bondage,
Yeah.
is it good or bad. So our belief is like when we do good actions, when we accumulate more of good things which will lead to better things in future, eventually our self-realization, which is the ultimate goal of all of us. But some saints like Ramana say, Sumayu, don't do anything, just because everything leads to some bondage.
Yeah.
So good and bad. So how do we reconcile these two things?
Yeah. When you bring Ramana Maharshi, you should remember Ramana Maharshi gives only the last final statement. Ramana Maharshi, his ideas are very wonderful, but then Ramana Maharshi talks in terms of the highest conclusions of spiritual life. But in Vedanta, there is a gradual evolution of our own karma ideal. So, for example, it's better that you should give up laziness and do something even with desire. It's far better to do something positive with a lot of desire, maybe a lot of egoism, all right. Suppose if somebody says that I'm going to clean this public place, I'm capable of doing that, you fellows can't do anything, I will do. That person is far better person than a fellow who doesn't do anything good for anyone, So Sri Ramakrishna says, if you are very egoistic, that is a good asset. It's like some money you have put in bank, you can use for good purpose. So the ego can be employed for a good purpose. Sri Ramakrishna uses a very strong language in Bengal. Let this ego, give it a good job, let him do. You can have a lot of ambition, desire, and do something good and noble. The next stage is doing the same thing without ambition and desire. But you should not try for the first time. You have heard of the story, a disciple was asked by his guru to bring a glass of water, and the disciple told him, no, I won't do that, because if I bring you drinking water, I become very egoistic. I have given you drinking water, so I won't do that. So sometimes people ask this question, I want to practice niskama karma. So actually, they are not willing to do anything. So it's something like, well, I would rather join Oxford or Harvard. I won't go to the primary school here. A child has no right to say that. He has to go to kindergarten, primary school, college, then go to university, not straight away. So niskama karma, or doing our duty without any selfish desire, is a higher goal. Before reaching that goal, we should try to learn to do our duty with efficiency, with full effect. Then only we will have the right to practice Dharma Yoga. Lord Krishna makes that very, very important. Na buddhivedam janiyed ajnanam karma sankinam. Karma can be very problematic if you don't understand it. So, in fact, Swami Vivekananda, out of frustration in one context, he told a fellow, can you do something terrible, something bad? We are lazy, dull, effeminate, hypocritical, self-deceiving fellow came to Vivekananda and talked philosophy. Swamiji became so frustrated. So told him, can you do something? Can you steal? Can you do something terrible? The point is, it's not that you're not advised to do something wrong. The man is totally a hypocrite, effeminate. So people who are incapable of doing anything, unwilling to do anything good, they would tell you, I want to do something wonderful or nothing. Absolutely wrong. So that's why Lord Krishna says the first step in spiritual life is to do our own work, our own duty with ambition. Sakama karma is the first stage, with a strong desire. And then you should be able to do the same without a strong desire, with total detachment. That's how we progress in spiritual life. So Ramana Maharshi's advice is considered the conclusion of Vedanta. So if you go, many of the modern teachers who became very popular in Western world, there's an interesting historical explanation for it. Because, you know, an American or an Englishman or a German doesn't have the problem of laziness. So if he reads Ramana Maharshi, he can easily understand it. But because he doesn't remain lazy, but people who are habitually lazy, they'll find a justification for doing nothing, not doing anything, and they quote Advaita. That's why Vivekananda actually, out of frustration, he exploded. Do something terrible. It's far better than doing nothing. A very effeminate, lazy, self-deceiving, hypocritical fellow came to Swami and began to preach about Nishkama Karma. Swamiji exploded actually. You know. So very important. That's why Lord Krishna never preaches Nishkama Karma for the beginner. A student who is working hard to get a high grade in examinations, you should be encouraged, you should work hard with a full ambition to get the highest grade and get a wonderful job. When he does that, when he becomes a billionaire, fully accomplished, you can tell him, no, you should practice charity, Nishkama Karma and all that. You should not do that to a child studying in kindergarten. You should not have any desire. He should have desire, a good desire, a noble desire, a desire that helps a person to grow, not in spiritual life, even material life. See, there you find Shankaracharya, Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, Lord Krishna, all the same line. They say you should have first of all a way to do something good and noble, and then think of the next stage. That's why, you know, at the beginning, I come to Gita, at the beginning, Lord Krishna, you know what Lord Krishna tells Arjuna? Arjuna was talking in terms of renunciation. And he was totally confused. Na kamshe vijayam Krishna, na cha rajam sukhanicha, kim no rajyena govinda, kim bhogai ki jivatena va. Suppose a special forces, man, a security person is guarding a school, be fully armed against terrorists. He says, oh, we should not do any harm to anyone. If terrorists are attacking a school, and if the security guard says, we should not do any harm to anyone. That was the position of Arjuna. Arjuna was actually like a security guard, like a soldier whose duty is to protect the women folk, the children, and the good people. So Krishna told him, do your duty. Remember. So Krishna told him, first do. So Klaibyam Masma Gamapatha, Naidato Yuvabadide, Kshudram Hreda Ubalyam, take to Tishta Parandava. Then he goes on selling, you know, see, for example, he goes on, there are 4 slokas at the beginning of the 2nd chapter where Lord Krishna gives Loka Nyaya, means the common sense, empirical wisdom. If you run away, you'll be made fun of others. Akirtim chabi bhudani kathaishinti aviyam sambhavidasya akirti marana adirichyade. All these ordinary justification for doing your duty is put forward by Lord Krishna. And then Lord Krishna in the 48, 49, 50, this Lord Krishna says, you know, Karma Yoga is mentioned. You know, that is Buddhi Yuko, Diga, Ube, Sukraduskade, Tasma Yoga, Yujasa Yoga, Karma Sukausalam. Karma Yoga is preached much later. Remember, first Karma Yoga is not preached. Sakama Karma, action with desire, is preached for the lazy man. And then action without desire is preached at a higher stage. And then only other higher disciplines are taught. So this is a very important point. Okay, thank you.
That's where they talk about purification of mind also. through all this?
Purification of the mind comes only when a person has already resolved his first basic needs. So remember, maybe normally people in modern times, maybe in the Bay Area, in modern highly competitive industrial societies, they can certainly focus on karma yoga, purification of mind, because they don't, if they are lazy, they cannot survive. So they don't need any exhortation to be active. You don't require that. In fact, in Arjuna's context, it was required. Arjuna was Arjuna's condition was much worse than your condition actually. Arjuna, who appears in the first chapter, is a timid, self-deceiving man. Krishna himself says, he says Arjuna is karmendriyani samyamya yaste manasas maran indriyarthan vimudharma mithyachara. You are a hypocrite, Krishna tells Arjuna, because Arjuna had a lot of ambition, not willingness to do anything. Lazy, but a lot of ambitions. So such a person should work hard at accomplish something great, then practice Niskama Karma. Niskama Karma, as you mentioned, is the means for purification and eventually Jnana Prapti, for spiritual illumination and liberation, moksha. That is true. Okay? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, yeah.
It's a very interesting subject. Thank you for giving the more insight into this. My question is that Sri Ramakrishna says that nothing happens without the will of the God.
Yeah.
Not even the blade of grass can move.
Yeah, yeah.
So in this journey, how much freedom do we have?
Yeah.
Or how much control do we
Yeah.
have in all the actions that we do? Or is it already predetermined?
Yeah.
Because we like to do good actions and all this, and sometimes it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So how much freedom or the flexibility
Yeah.
or free will
Yeah,
that we have?
Yeah. It's a harmony of our effort and God's grace. Without our own effort, you won't be able to make use of God's grace. So, without our effort, we won't be able to become fit for God's grace. That grace worthiness is called. Becoming fit for being blessed by God's grace. Even for that, we require effort. For example, you see, in the gospel, in the Holy Mother's life, there is a very wonderful example. Somebody came to Mother and told Mother, everything is God's grace, as you mentioned, so we don't have to do anything. Then Mother told those disciples, those devotees, see, I am doing japa all the time, meditation all the time, karma yoga all the time, and you say you don't have to do anything. So Mother emphasized the need for karma yoga, purusha prayatna, to those devotees. You can find many interesting examples in the Gospel of Holy Mother, the teachings of Holy Mother. In another context, some other disciples came to Mother, Mother, I've been praying, working hard, karma yoga, puja, prayer, spiritual disciplines for a long time, nothing happens. We did so much. Then Mother says, because you did so much, do you think that God should appear before you? God is not like vegetable that you buy in the market. You have paid my credit card, I had in the package, you cannot have it. So you find actually in real life it is a harmony of both. Without our effort, even we won't be able to develop that inner insight to recognize God's grace as God's grace. One of the of course, in the Gospel you find innumerable examples, in the Bhagavatam Purana, many. But one striking example for Western listeners you can find in the autobiographical writings of Saint Teresa of Avila, where she gives the example of a farmer who is trying to irrigate the field. There is a well, there is a river nearby which is full of water. So the water has to be brought to the field. You can do it in so many different ways. You can use water mill. You can cut a canal. All these things. But suppose you sow the seed without preparing the ground, without removing the thorns and grass and weeds from the ground, and you just sow the seed or you irrigate without removing these obstacles, what happens? You get plenty a crop of weeds and grass, not of food grains. So if you want to get the expected result, you should prepare the field first. So our effort actually prepares our mind. It is like removing thorns and grass and stones from the field before we irrigate. And then Saint Teresa she says that suppose it starts raining all of a sudden, it's God's grace. But really speaking, even if God's grace comes before the field is ready, you don't get anything. So, and Sri Ramakrishna says that God's grace is always there, like a wind blowing. But to be able to make use of the favorable wind, you need to row to the midstream. Then only you will be able to be assisted by the wind, because you won't be able to make use of the wind at the close to the bank of the river. So it's a matter of harmonizing both. It's always very important. In real life, you find without our effort, our mind doesn't become ready for any kind of spiritual disciplines. It's a very, very important thing to remember. Yeah.
So sometimes, that we do so much, we make so much efforts in accomplishing something or achieving something, but somehow it does not happen.
That's true.
So does that mean that we are not doing something right?
Yeah.
Or we are not
Yeah,
working?
absolutely. This happens to everyone. People who are very sincere, very focused, with total sincerity they do things. Still, it doesn't seem to click. The point is, the logic of mathematics doesn't apply in real life. In mathematics, 2 plus 2, you can always predetermine, it's 4, nothing else. But in life, it doesn't happen. You do everything wonderful. Suppose you help a person with all sincerity, he becomes your worst enemy. This happens in real life. That's why people turn to spirituality. If everything is predeterministic, there is no need of spirituality. There is no need of music, art or painting or any sublime skills, poetry. People will not learn to any of these higher arts or even mysticism if we can always predict what is going to happen. Actually, it is a great blessing that there is an unknown factor which is not within our control. Life itself becomes meaningless if we can predetermine everything in advance. It's a great blessing, remember. So very important. I can give an example. Suppose a man like, suppose a person becomes a great scientist, but like Einstein, for example, no better name to mention. He had to go through a lot of difficulties. After all, his early life was not exactly the most, not very happy, So the point is, suppose Einstein had known that even after becoming such a brilliant man, he will have to face a lot of problems. As a child, suppose he had known the whole GPS system he had of his own life, he would not be able to become a great scientist. He would not work hard if he knew he's already going to become an Einstein. He will not become an Einstein. He became an Einstein because he did not know he was going to become an Einstein.
Right. Exactly.
Because he was afraid of total failure, of death. He was born in Germany in the time of Hitler, so he came here. So the point is, many great men became great because they did not know that they were going to become great. If they knew that they were going to become great, they would not make any effort to become great, and they would not have become great, really speaking. So this unknown factor, which means the logic of mathematics 2 plus 2, 4, doesn't apply in real life. It's all the better for it, really speaking. This
it happens, sometimes certain things we try to accomplish and it doesn't happen.
But this other way also.
After doing so much efforts and all this, but later on, we realize it was good that it didn't happen.
That's one thing. Secondly, there is also another important thing. You do your best to get something, that result did not happen. You do nothing and something wonderful happens. So you get, there is this balancing system in nature. You do something wonderful, all that is possible to help a man, That person is a rascal, ungrateful. You do nothing for another person, he becomes your best friend. That also happens. So you can see this balancing system in nature. Remember, the unpredictability of human destiny is what saves our life. If we could always predict what is going to happen, life will be miserable. If human life were like a machine that we can predetermine, we can fully understand, anticipate earlier, then we would not go for anything beyond the empirical. You have seen the picture of these, I'm not sure how genuine they are, the aliens, airlines people with a big head and all that. So they say they had the entire machine ready to do whatever they want. So you can imagine their condition. They don't look very wonderful specimens, They can do everything in a machine. They can destroy things without using maybe advanced weapon system. They can use laser weapons. They can do whatever they want in split seconds. But you don't think they will be wiser than a Sri Ramakrishna or a Shankaracharya? No. So machine cannot produce anything absolutely wonderful. So 2 plus 2, if 2 plus 2 is 4, if that were true for life, human life would be very mechanical and so much less livable and much more miserable than it is. Okay. Eh? Please.
Swami?
Yeah.
I am here in the tent. Your example of using the canal, working with God or the unit of mind, makes real good sense to me. That's an individual working with a problem on an individual basis. And I think this kind of is a lot what Jerry was asking about negotiating. When you're dealing with people, for example, as a mother with her child, or a mother with her daughter-in-law, or as mother had trouble with her family too. When a mother's instinct is to step forward and say something to her older child, I'm not talking about children, but and you see as a mother that it's not really working the way you think it should, and then you begin to question, well, who am I to say what I think is right? And you begin to step back. I'm just thinking of this as a perpetual problem here. You step back and let the universe take care of whatever it needs to take care of, whether it's causing suffering or happiness or resolution. But then you have the mother's heart of, have I done enough? That conflict of trusting to take care of it, that you're part of it, and we can't possibly understand the whole thing, the way karma all works, and just to let go. Is that the proper way?
You're right. After all that you have done, after you have done all that you could do, to the best of your ability, to the best of your own resources, and still if you feel you have not fully resolved the problem, then you can pray and leave it to God, because that will always have a positive effect. So you often find in real life there are circumstances where even if you when you use all your resources, faculty you have, still you are not able to resolve a problem. That is a way of evolving to the next stage of spiritual wisdom, because you understand that there is so much that human beings can do. There is something beyond your own realm. There is something that's beyond your own ability to resolve a problem. At that time, if you take refuge in God, you find a higher power begins to operate. But it doesn't happen unless you're already exhausted your own faculties. Because the real prapatti, what do you call prapatti in Ramanuja's philosophy, when you completely self-surrender to God, then you find a higher power begins to work and you find the problem resolved. It's a real experience. In fact, what we discussed just now, the examples of great men and women, including Saint Teresa of Avila I referred to, they are examples of great spiritual personalities who transcended the empirical and eventually left the empirical behind and transcended the higher realm. Then you find the problem is resolved at a higher level that's not within our level. This is a real thing that happens in spiritual life. I don't know if they heard. Eh?
One more question, Swami.
Yeah. Can make it louder.
Outside.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for this lecture, and thank you for everyone supporting enable us to gather today. My question is related to the first question.
Yeah.
Related to individual and community. So to me, like the integration of wisdom will also affect social political structures.
Yeah.
For me, if we were to gather a group of people under ignorant, operating under not knowing who they were, and they were to construct a social contract, their social contract would resemble capitalism. And if we have another community who is a wise community who maybe takes the wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita. There's one line in the Gita where it says, one who recognizes the joy and suffering of others as if they were their own has attained the highest state of spiritual union, which is also related to Jesus' message, what you do to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you also do unto me. So for me, like everyone in Palestine is me. Every homeless person is me. It's not that I share their suffering. It's my suffering. I mean, I am them. So what do you think about like capitalism, the power of the desire for power over others, and how can, if we cannot like have a new constitution and a revolution, do you think that one option might be a community of sages, a wise community where we have our own autonomous community, our political structures that are in accord with wisdom? Thank you.
Yeah, if we spread spiritual ideas to a larger number of people, it always is helpful. But forming a specific community or a cult or a group of wise men, so to speak, it doesn't really work that way. Because spirituality works at the individual level, basically. It doesn't work at the national level or community level. But if a large number of people, a large percentage of people, somehow or other, learn about spirituality and the need for spirituality, spiritual values in modern times, that will be always helpful, no doubt about it. But a spiritual community or spiritual commune as such, it's not intelligible. And there were many such cults and groups that formed from time to time, and the end result was not very pleasant. It did more harm to spirituality and society than otherwise. So spirituality can never be a cult. It is a basic spiritual, fundamental way of looking at life from a higher perspective. That is basically what it is. Yeah. Please, you want to say something? Anyway, I think we can always continue our discussion in the next session. It already is 11:35 already. So you are most welcome to continue this discussion. we will have the next session at 3 o'clock, 3 to 4:30 in the same place. And right now we have from 12 to 1 meditation in this hall. Swami Vedanta will be present here. And then from 1 to 3 free time, and 3 to 4:30 this discussion will continue. 30 to 5 refreshments. 5. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.